So now you only work with people with an M last name? Is that the thing? It's Madden and Mendez, and the rest are, incidental?
Yeah, I'm in my Judi Dench phase. I don't know. I don't quite know.
How did this marriage begin?
What, Newman and me?
Yeah. You kids.
I only work with people whose names begin with N. No,
it was called, didn't you?
Actually, it was a pretty good story because I was doing a movie in Europe, and it was a weird circumstance where, in order to qualify for certain kind of quota things, in order to get a tax break, we ended up in a completely counterintuitive situation where I was not allowed to work with a European composer.
Huh.
I couldn't even begin to explain why that was. And so I said to the producers, well, what does that mean? I can work with an American composer? And they said, yeah. So, and I'd always, admired his stuff. So I said, well, let's go. I couldn't believe I was in that situation. I didn't think anybody would allow me to work with an American composer on a smaller British film. But so I sent the script to Tom. That was the debt. And
how long before? How long was that period of time from first talking on the phone to actually doing the work? Was it months? You hadn't shot the movie
No,
yet.
we hadn't shot the movie.
That's right.
No. I called you when we were in early prep, I think.
Yeah. So like 8 months later?
Yeah,
or something,
it was about 8 months later. Yeah.
So how does that work at that point? You do a lot of movies, so
in terms of getting to know a director and all that?
To know a director, to figure out what you're going to do, and
you just hope someone's smart, right? That you can talk to someone, and in the case of John, that was always evident. You can't ever know. You kind of shrug and say, okay, let's do this. Obviously, I'd known his work, so that was part of it.
And we spoke a little bit about the script, didn't we, early on? But I guess the point of departure was when you saw the movie for the first time, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it typically is. Typically talk is this cheap thing we all do because how else are we going to get to know each other?
Right.
But in the end, it's just getting together in a room and having ideas to really know how you can interact and what the nature of the collaboration is going to be.
So you start doing that before you write anything, or?
What you mean? Get it? No. You'd sketch ideas. You'd have some ideas that you just say, "What about this?" And you're not even trying to sell the ideas because selling ideas always gets you nowhere, right? So you just play ideas and how is John going to react and what does he say and do our.
It's worth saying because Tom works in a very unusual way. I think normally speaking, in my experience of working with composers, they will come up with thematic approaches. In other words, they'll play you a tune or something, and Tom works in a very different way, a way of sort of painting onto the film in terms of textures or sounds or ideas, little emblematic ideas that he will throw up against the film to see how the film responds and what we feel about the material. So
it's a good way of just knowing a lot really quickly, which is if this works, we kind of agree that it works and then ask ourselves why.
Yeah.
And then you start, putting it everywhere and saying, oh, it definitely doesn't work here and why. And then you have that conversation. And you're really dealing with material as opposed to idea, which just seems like the easiest way to approach a rather complex relationship.
It's the obvious way but not everybody works that way, and it's very organic and ultimately very architectural because you build up a sort of a musical approach to the thing that isn't premeditated and isn't, well, this tune came into my head while I was watching. But Tom's work, in my experience, has this quality of inhabiting the same landscape as all the other sound elements in the film. So it becomes atmosphere, sometimes it becomes very pronounced dialogue in other places, and it's weaving its way through all of that. It's it's not for nothing, I think, that other composers, he can't say this, but I can, all look in his direction because it's an extraordinarily liberating way of working on film.
But it also encourages rejection, which is an odd thing to say. But the idea is if depending on the nature of how I present an idea, if I really love an idea, it's going to make John resist it just because, don't push it on me, right? So how can you, as passively as you can, have ideas that you can both look at together and just see how it's coming at you, as opposed to me saying, John, you're going to love this. You know.
So have you developed this method of doing things, or is this something that is different still on some films?
I think if I have, it's all pain avoidance. It's how do you get, because you know there's going to be a moment when John's not around, when I'm not around, where John is going to say, you know, I never liked that cue, right? So how do you get
Let's
to that?
move it.
Yeah, that's right. So how do you, I mean, and it'll still happen. I mean, the best laid plans, you can still change your mind. But how do you get to that sooner so that you're less surprised by what goes down, you know, later? So a lot of it's just pain avoidance.
So is there any real functional difference in working on something like The Debt versus something like Marigold?
Procedurally, I don't think so.
No, not procedurally. No.
I mean, here's an idea. What do you think? Here's another idea for the same area. Oh, I like that better. Why? Well, it's faster. The others, I like the other idea, but it slowed down the pace of the scene. Oh, that's a clue. You know, pace is a clue, and it's practical as opposed to poetical. And I think it's easy to get poetical in these environments, and you just end up talking if it's too much that.
Yeah.
So did you lock this movie down? Or I guess something like The Dead, actually, where you had that long time between finishing the movie and actually getting the movie
well, no,
released.
actually, yes, although that didn't affect Tom because we'd finished the movie. We'd finished the manufacture of the movie long before that movie ever, as you know, hit the screens because of a studio change and so on.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a particularly slow process outputting the movie. I mean, the part that is interesting to talk about, because it's the devil in the room that everybody has to deal with in Tom's line of business, is that the first moment he sees the film, of course, it has a temp score on it. And how you negotiate that, you know, the director feels apologetic about it, but the way movies are you know, processed and made, the movie is quite obviously gone in front of an audience before Tom is allowed to, you know, come and make his creative contribution, and to put it in front of an audience, you have to float the film. So,
but it's your way too of knowing what the movie is and what its needs are. It's as important for a director as anybody, I think, to see how does this scene play and does music help it. So it's this awkward but necessary step.
So what do you do with it at that point? Do you push it away, or
you hope it's average. You hope the temp music does its job, but doesn't do it so deftly that it's going to really inhibit creativity. But it always does, right? Because an idea put in front of you just can't help but to move you towards it.
Tom's expression for it was, "You can't unring the bell," which is true. You know, once you've seen a particular idea, which could, of course, quite easily be an idea of Tom's redeployed, and certainly on Marigold we used quite a bit of Tom's music in the temp score. But it's you know, I'm full of admiration that anybody can sidestep that. I mean, I work with quite a well-known composer who shall be nameless because I wouldn't want to embarrass her, but who on a movie I did, who we had used in a way that I thought was a polite way to proceed, only her music in the temp score. And she came to a screening. She wanted to arrive at the end because she was meeting me, and the screening had started late, and she arrived 15 minutes before the end, and was standing outside and heard her own music at particular moments on the film, and she fled in terror. Yes, because she could not, I mean, she got about not being able to unring the bell. She couldn't, it totally blocked her in terms of being able to think about another piece of music in relation to that, because it was some piece of hers. So, but you know, obviously you have to learn how to negotiate that, because it's true in every situation, pretty much.
So does it matter to you whether it's your work or somebody else's work that's on it?
Probably doesn't. It's a hurdle. It's a real hurdle. So what you want to do ultimately is hope that it's a dramatic solution, musically speaking, and that you can arrive at a similar dramatic solution through different music vocabulary, or, you know, harmony or whatever. Sometimes you can. You know, sometimes it's going to mirror, because there's just essential elements in the temp that are kind of unbeatable or something.
Are there are you working against the fact that there's a completed piece of music versus a...
Definitely.
We're trying to put it together.
Yeah, it's a little nightmarish. You start playing ideas with you know, crappy samples, and they don't sound as good next to the temp, which is all you know, polished and
fully
refined.
Produced.
So you have to remember that you're there's that step to go.
Yeah.
But it's a little nightmarish until you make that step.
So when do you know you're over the hump?
You mean creatively, or in terms of completing? You mean
That you're at the point where, okay, I've put that behind me, we're moving forward, and...
Oh, there's a moment, John said this a couple of times, where he can't stand hearing the temp anymore, where you feel like he's absorbed it. I think there's something shocking about the new, in almost every instance, that makes a director recoil from any new idea, particularly because the movie's working on some level with the temp score.
Yes.
It's just working, and you got to figure director's relieved to know that it's working at all, right? As a bottom line.
Yeah.
And so here comes the new music, and so the question is does that make you nervous again? Does that make you question things that you would stop questioning?
I think it has a lot to do also with knowing your partner, knowing who you're working with, because Tom's way of working is unusual, and as long as you open yourself, I welcomed it. I found it absolutely thrilling, to be honest with you. But I think he would say, trust me, it's not going to sound like this. This is just one strand of something. It's going to go on and on and on, and you're going to get bored with it in 1 minute's time because it's just going to repeat itself. But stay with it.
Sure enough, you'd say, it's boring and it repeats itself. The ears are kind of, there's no way around that. The ears hear what they hear. So as much as you can, give a caveat, it's going to be boring after 15 seconds and repeat. You can't blame a director for saying it sounds like it's just going on and on.
Well, also, I'll just give you a little bit more of a glimpse into Tom's way of working. So what we do usually is come up with textures and ideas, and then those develop into a kind of skeletal idea for what the shape of the cube might be, which is still either rendered in sampled form, or sometimes not even that. It doesn't necessarily have that many layers to it. And then he goes and builds those ideas with frequently a group of musicians that he works with, has worked with for many years, I think it's safe to say.
Yeah, a lot of years.
And that's completely extraordinary process, because then the cue starts to build and metamorphose and change. And I don't know how many people do this, but I was with him for the whole of that process on the deck, much to his discomfort.
He wouldn't leave.
He couldn't get rid of me.
Well, there's a reason for that, though.
Yeah.
The reason is if you don't quite know what you're doing, and there's a director kind of rubbing his chin, it's easy to lose confidence in this period of exploration, which is, let's try anything, But John was great at it, but
right.
it can make you just
I can
nervous
see that
you don't quite know. And
actually my being involved in it was not about control. Actually, it was just about a sort of greed and curiosity to see it all unfold, because there's some amazing players.
It was similar in Marigold.
Marigold was very similar, yeah, except more so because we had elements that we were working with there that were unprecedented for you and for me in terms of individual soloists and so forth, and instrumentation.
So did that make it more challenging on Marigold, or was that just a great opportunity to play?
It ended up being great because he was so enthusiastic, and so it was good to get that initial enthusiasm to feel like we were in the right place, because I was nervous about my role in Marigold in terms of being an American, not knowing much about India and the music of India, and what kind of credibility did I have doing the score. And John was encouraging that way in terms of saying that he believed I would have something to offer.
So why did you think he had something to offer?
Well, because I know I was well schooled in the kind of resources that he can bring, which are completely extraordinary. I didn't want either a sort of slavishly ethnic score. I mean, God knows there's some brilliant composers in India, but I felt because it was about cultural collision, it seemed entirely natural to me to come at it from a Western perspective at the same time. And Tom's a magpie anyway, and was going to absorb all of those ideas and all of those influences and come up with something that was very unique to the film, which I think is exactly what happened.
But I had to believe him when he said that. Right?
I suppose
Because
it's just
you can start by thinking that and go, I was wrong about Newman. You wonder. So until you kind of get somewhere, you're kind of nowhere in a strange way.
And it's music is so extraordinary. It's really, really good film music. You probably are not noticing tremendously, and yet it is the core identity of the film. It's such a paradox that. And, I don't want to necessarily walk out of a movie going, wow, that was an incredible score. That may not be, sometimes it is, but it may not be the carry out that you want. And yet, at the point at which Tom does his work, or any composer comes in and does his work, everybody, and this is what makes life, I think, so difficult, why I think it's kind of a heroic undertaking, is focused on only that element, because all the arguments being had about everything else in the film, the cuts and this performance and that performance and the rhythm and all of this kind of thing, the only thing left to discuss is the music. And of course, music utterly transforms the film. And
good or bad. Often,
yeah, well, yes, or whatever. It's going to be an issue of argument, possibly. So that's quite an important process to navigate, though an interesting one, because as you say, as Tom says, the process he goes through with the director is then mirrored by that same process with all the executives and so forth. But at that point, he should have an ally. He should have me on his side saying, no, this is right because of this, just listen to this. This will knock your socks off, kind of thing.
Yeah, my dad used to say everyone knows their business and music.
It's true.
So it's really hard to have people listening without having real opinions about what the music should be doing.
Yeah.
Well, it's fun, and the other thing is, as that would refer to, very few people actually know what the hell they're talking about. They kind of know what they feel.
It's true, but it's still taste, and taste is undefendable. So if John uses an adjective to describe a piece, and I go, I don't get what you mean by that adjective. It kind of doesn't matter that I don't get it if in fact he feels it. So it's quirky.
It's a very hard thing to talk about. Obviously, it's a very hard thing to articulate.
But at some point, as a director, don't you have to just, at some point, accept some things that still surprise you?
Yes, totally. I mean, I think that perhaps the longer you're in the business of filmmaking, the more you understand that it's the things that you don't know and that you can't foresee are the interesting ones. I mean, perhaps that's just a comment on the limitations of one's own imagination, but I find the accidents and the things you don't see coming is when the film starts to take on its own identity, because it starts to talk back to you and it starts to have a voice of its own.
And so human when those things happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, no, on the contrary, I don't feel like it's got to be this. It's a little weird, I have to say, it's a little weird when it's a piece of his, and I go, oh my God, how are we ever going to improve on this? That's a tough one. But we were in that situation with Marigold, and maybe a little bit with The Debt, I think, but certainly with Marigold. And it's always a thrilling experience. I mean, it has been for me with him. It's been terrific.
Has the business of doing the scores changed for you, or it seems like there's fewer and fewer memorable scores. I mean, because ultimately I always think if you're walking away from the theater humming it, even if you weren't aware of it, that's a good thing.
It could be that the idea of tune and melody has changed just in our ability to buy it as an audience. So I think it has changed for a number of reasons, but it's this is why I think it comes back to how does the music come off the image? To talk that way and say, oh, that it's a nice tune, but it says too much. Well,
right.
Yeah.
Why is it saying
too loudly at the wrong place? I think Tom's right about that. I mean, I think tastes have changed. You're not necessarily. I don't think audience will tolerate anymore the identity of a scene being articulated through a completely independent musical statement. Which actually, if you go back in time, that's a much more common way of scoring films.
Yeah, so how does the music involve you in the drama? And that's kind of probably where we start and stop, which is this a more compelling scene with this music or with that music? And if so, why?
Yeah, and also the other, the most crucial things in in the way a score works, of course, is when the music starts and when the music stops, because that alteration of language, that involvement of a secondary way of interacting with the material becomes very marked to the point where the music starts or when the music stops.
And
so
it's pretty weird when you think about it. What's it doing there? Why is it there in the first place? Which is why I always think it's harder when it goes away than when it comes in, because it's always lifting something when it comes in. But unless it goes out on a door slam or some way that you can really, why does it go away? And this kind of loss of energy, for good reason. It's a strange thing.
It is strange, but it's.
But take it away, and people will say, "Well, it feels empty," which is kind of encouraging. That it's needed beyond anyone's ability to talk about why it's there.
So, as a composer, is that just instinctual for you?
At its best, it is. I think. I think talk is cheap. We can talk about why it works or why it doesn't, but in the end, if I'm moved by it, or if it makes me sit on the edge of my seat more, then you feel like you've done something.
Giacchino once said that you can tell how good a movie is by how many cues it has. The fewer the cues, the better the movie.
I don't know if that's necessarily true. That would imply that music is there in moments of filmic weakness.
Exactly, to rescue.
And I don't think that's true at all. I think some movies sop up music and others don't. For stylistically, I think it's aesthetic and style.
It is. It's different movies require different approaches, I think, and there is a sort of bias that somehow music is cheating, which is nonsense. Really, it has to do with what world you're trying to create.
But certainly, sometimes music is cheating. I mean, sometimes people do use it.
Well, they
as
do.
As it would fast cutting or other things.
That's
or certainly the executives will say that, for Christ's sake, let's get some music on the scene.
There's that famous Bernard Herrmann quote which says, "You can dress a corpse, but you can't bring it back to life." So I think it's true. If the movie's weak, then music can help make it less weak, maybe. But oftentimes it can be wearying. Too much music it stops doing what it's supposed to be doing. You just make it stop.
Well, that's another discussion we often, Tom and I often have, which is you can feel glutted by music, and therefore you want to just leave a decent pause before it raises its head again, and that sometimes I always have a tendency, which I have to check myself on, to say, I think they should go on just to this moment here.
It's a measure of volume too, I think,
it is,
too. If music's far back enough, so it's not in front of the screen and between the ears and the eyes of the audience, Well,
like there's a dryness to the performances and the tone of this picture, Exotic, more so than something like Shakespeare in Love, which is more lush and poetic and kind of big, brassy, whereas this really is, these older people have a very dry style.
It's true, and also, Tom's job on this, or certainly his achievement in this, even if we didn't articulate it as his job, it's absolutely creating the aroma of the experience, and the visceral experience they're having. That in this particular film, the score has an enormous kind of voice, I think, in terms of, because you're dealing with 9, 10 story strands, and traversing those and bringing out the affinities between one and to another and so forth. You simply, I could not have made the movie comprehensible without that voice. So it's
really,
it's true.
Really good before there's a note of music, I think.
It still had a temp there when you saw it. I mean, it's no, I think it's just in terms of evoking the country, because the one sense that you don't have, which is God knows a sense you're aware of when you're in India, is the sense of smell. So I kind of looked to the music to give you that extraordinary, intoxicating
assault
thing
of the
that happens.
senses.
Assault on the senses, and it does a lot of heavy lifting on behalf of the other senses that might not be employed, So it was very unusual, this one. I mean, his music is incredibly good at evoking atmosphere. In The Debt, it does it in a completely different way. There's a whole sequence in The Debt where they're first trying to get the guy out of East Berlin on a by a transit system and so on, which is totally wordless, and you would not even be aware that it was scored, really. If you asked somebody after they'd seen that sequence, they would not know.
Right.
Because the music is hovering between a musical zone and a sort of zone of pure sound, and yet it's articulating the entire thing. And I think, and that's an atmosphere that could not be more contrasted with the atmosphere we're dealing with in Marigold. But that's formidable talent, is all I'm saying.
So is that something do you like the variety, or is it just the right movie and the right director and the right combination of things comes along, or?
Yeah, I think
the variety is pretty extreme.
It is, but I think, in the case of John, he's just amazing to work with. But I think you kind of take what's in front of you. If I'd said to John, I don't work on those types of movies. I really love The Dead. It wouldn't have, A lot of times,
I think it's something, what you've talked about quite a bit is, and I think that this does happen from time to time, where the director doesn't quite know what sort of film they've made.
Right.
And that's a tricky one. They're waiting for Tom to identify it for them.
Right, or it's a measure of leadership too. That the great directors are the ones that know how to encourage, know how to encourage after they've discouraged you, and how to bring good stuff out. And John's one of those people that you just kind of want to flock to the good ones. You really do.
So is doing a Bond movie like having a temp score that you can't get out of your head for 40 years, or
because
he has to include the temp score in that one.
Yeah, well, like the most storied theme of movie history. Yeah, it's tougher. Action's tougher because I think there's such requirements. Subwoofer requirements. How is it going to hit the gut, and how is it going to stay excited every moment? In the case of something like Marigold, I think there's a little bit more room to be whimsical with choices.
Right.
And that's a delight.
So that movie seems so not like Sam Mendes.
I know.
In so many ways, and yet he's made it into a Sam Mendes movie. Also, it's kind of a fascinating balance.
Yeah.
But I guess partially by bringing you along for the ride.
You would hope, but there was this whole kind of American contingent. You just prayed that the Brits did not resent us too much, so that we kind of did our thing.
Well, they get to be Batman. They get to be.
That's true. That's true. That's a good point. Thank you.
You're not sneaking any Americans into India, though. I guess maybe for the sequel. Be more Exotic Marigold Hotel. So when the movie comes out and exists as a film in the world, do you have any ongoing relationship with it? Do you go watch it with an audience to see how it plays, or do you?
I can. I guess it depends. Sometimes I start to feel shy about my contribution, and I'll wait until I just happen to see it on TV or something, or if it comes on, and then oftentimes you're so surprised, and I guess the line I say is you've kind of forgotten what you used to hate about it, and suddenly, by that I mean the music, or things that you think could have been better, and you kind of forget all those things. Those little moment-to-moment negotiations you have with yourself as a creative person, where you say, "Damn, if only this was a little more in tune, or if I'd gotten better rhythm, or whatever." So it's nice to visit the stuff, but maybe months later, not the week of opening.
You don't really have a test screening for music.
Well, there'd be a playback.
There's a playback, and sometimes I don't even want to go to that because I'm so raw. And
I think it's interesting because the analogy with the way I'm responding to the material is that I directors famously, of course, can't bear to see the assembly, because the point where they first see everything strung together is a version of what Tom's talking about, where all you can see is why you well, first of all, the staggering lack of imagination.
How you fell short.
Yes, how you just completely blew the entire thing, and the suffocating mediocrity of absolutely everything. Because what you're doing is you're dealing with the physical realization of a beautiful idea that was totally fluid in your head, and now you see it in all its raw, kind of pedestrian imperfection. And
that's a moment of you have to have strength at that moment, right? You do. The strength to know that it's not what it appears this minute.
That's right. And I would procrastinate that moment forever if I could. I know every director I know feels the same way. But then, of course, I have the benefit of the editing process to go through and learn the film again on its own terms, as opposed to how far it might have fallen short of whatever it was I was trying to do. So, and in a way, when he first hears the score working, he's just experiencing still a set of imperfections, or if I,
Or at the very least, the speakers are now way far away. This control that I exercised on the music is now it's part of the movie. So you really have to. I find myself stepping back from faders, literally, and removing myself from the experience of the music making as much as I can, because I know that's how it's going to end up. I mean, I'm never going to be able to turn it up.
Well, it's almost like you don't have an edit.
No.
Because you ultimately, when you finally get the score and you've got the orchestra do it, you can tinker with things in and out and all that, but ultimately, you've done it. You shot your wad, and you
That's
don't
right.
get to fix it so
And
much.
now it's going to be up to John to mix it and to make bigger decisions upon what's the content of a scene, and is it going to be driven by music, or is music going to kind of sit back and let.
That was a sound mixer right
exactly.
there. They hate the
You see, the
fucking
music
composer.
is drowned out.
The sound mixer's like,
That's
screw
the way
you,
it always
I'm blowing
is. You
something up.
see, he's not even surprised by it.
So I'm sorry, we're in the middle of a sentence, I think.
There's just a moment where it becomes less about the music,
Yeah.
and you have to kind of acknowledge that moment, and that's why, again, stepping away for many weeks or months before you kind of dive back in is good, because there is this expectation or this sense of what you've done versus how it ends up that you kind of have to come to terms with. And when you're just hot off the press of it all, you're literally just finished your mixes, we're going to go and have a playback and get notes. It's, oh my God, I don't think I can do that.
So
But it's a good thing to do. It is a
Yeah.
good thing to do.
So if you both have experienced the award circuit at different times, is that like now, okay, the band's getting back together and now we can just have a love fest and
Do you
talk
mean
about
on
how
it-
well it all worked together?
You mean like now or like next
like
movie?
in next 3 months from now, 4 months from now, assuming a Marigold gets nominated, and you're talking about how much you love the movie and how great it is and how it all came together.
Well, there's loving the movie, and then there's the movie being successful, even
Yeah.
beyond loving it. So there's that. You can kind of sit and go, wow, it did all right, and people are seeing the work we did, and that's an added bonus.
Yeah, and of course it happens very rarely, and when it does, it's absolutely thrilling, of course, because
and you feel like you made some right choices,
Yeah.
or at the bottom line, if you enjoy it, if you go to see Marigold and enjoy the music and how it all works, you can't help but to kind of go, wow, this was really a rich experience on many levels. And some of the best experiences I've had, they really the movie leaves you with a feeling, and Marigold really left me with it's almost physical. There's just something to it that you retain. And that's not always the case, but by any means, I think.
And do you ever see it as anything but a bunch of mistakes, or?
no, on the contrary, I see it as a masterpiece. It quite clearly is. How could you possibly imagine otherwise? No, I think, as I was saying, because you go through the editing process, it becomes something quite different. It takes on a life of its own. In this case, it's about something to do with the democratic nature of the narrative. In this case, that the movie belongs to a lot of people, means that it sort of has an independent life and an independent emotional life, which is, in one sense, it's very clear what the movie is, and you think, oh, what a nice movie. In another sense, there's something going on in it that has to do with, the stage in their lives these people are at and so forth. And it's a quite hard film to classify, I found when I was talking about it. And I ended up, for want of a better way of talking about it, saying it was a melancholy comedy, because it does have a lot of sort of pain going on underneath it all, and
But relatable
sadness. Yeah, and so to answer your question, those are the things that come out when you see it again, to me. The other thing that it has, which is again very relevant to the music, is that I was very much after a sense of intoxication in the film. I think that it is about that, and the interesting thing is that that's an exact parallel to what an audience experiences when they see the film. It's what's happening to the characters, and it's what happens to you when you see it, ideally. That it sort of immerses you so completely in something that you feel different when you come out of it, and hopefully you like the feeling, because the film is, optimistic. It's hopeful,
Verging on joyous. I mean, it really is joyous at the end.
Yeah. So that feeling doesn't have any authorship to it. It's just got nothing to do with whether it's my work or anybody else's work. I just look at it and enjoy that about the film. And I guess other people must have done, because, you know, it's one of those that got out there. It was kind of very cool and gratifying that it did. We had no reason to expect that it would in the way that it did.
You didn't give all the credit to Thomas. I can't believe it.
That would be wrong.
It was rubbish before then.